ICARUS, Charleston, South Carolina, 10th May 1942. From Executive Officer ICARUS to Commanding Officer ICARUS. Subject: Action of 9th May 1942. Reference: A. Article 948 U.S. Navy Regulations. 1. At 1620, 9th May 1942, USS Icarus was proceeding on course 238 degrees PGC, speed 14 knots, en route from New York, New York to Key West, Florida. Lieutenant Junior Grade E.D. Howard, United States Coast Guard Reserve, was officer of the deck. A sound contact was picked up on the port bow, which was rather mushy, but was only 150 wide. 1625. The commanding officer was called. 1629. As the contact drew to the quarter, the explosion of a torpedo was seen, felt, and heard on the port quarter. General Quarters. Changed course to 070 degrees PGC. Heard propellers. Submarine attempted to hide in our previous wake. Fired 5 depth charges in a diamond pattern. 1 from rack, followed by 2 from Y-gun. 1 from rack, and later another from rack. It was later learned that this attack destroyed submarine's periscope and killed the conning officer. Reversed course. Submarine was moving to right. Lead submarine, and at 1645 dropped 1 charge from rack and followed with Y-gun V pattern. Large air bubbles observed. Learned that submarine attempted to surface at this point, but that machinery had been disabled. Reversed course. 1702. Dropped 1 charge. Reversed course and dropped 1 charge at 1708. 1709. Submarine surfaced down by the stern. Opened fire with 3-inch gun and all 6 machine guns. Opening range 1,000 yards. Headed directly for target. Expended 14 rounds and scored 7 hits on conning tower. 1711. Submarine crew seen to be abandoning ship. 1714. Submarine sank, ceased firing, and continued circling spot. 1734. Dropped 1 charge on contact later believed to be wreck of submarine. 1750. Stopped and picked up 33 prisoners, including 4 wounded. 1 lost leg and died later at 22:15. 1 had lost an arm, 1 had fractured wrist and possible bullet inside, and 1 had slight wound on hand. Each man was searched as he came aboard. All were equipped with life jackets and lungs of excellent quality. 30 of the prisoners were placed under guard in the forward crew's compartment. 2 of the wounded in the crew's head, and the badly injured man on deck. 1805. Resumed course for Charleston, South Carolina, at 14 knots, zigzagging. The crew of the submarine was reported by Captain Lieutenant Rathke, the commanding officer, to have consisted of 4 officers and 41 men. One of the men stated that the submarine had been in the vicinity for 4 days. The commanding officer stated it was a 500-ton ship. Submarine sank at 34 degrees 12.5 north and 76 degrees 35 west. The conduct of all the officers and crew was marked by alertness, enthusiasm, and coolness. The contact was first picked up by Rabich, William L., 237067, Soundman, 3rd Class, Pro, and the machine was effectively operated during the attack by Quinones Saltiago P. Jr., 224869, Boatswain's Mate, 2nd Class, Pro, and Laskowski Arthur J., 203826, Soundman, 3rd Class, Pro. The marksmanship of Mueller Charles E., 205391, Boatswain's Mate, 1st Class, Pro, on the 3-inch gun is commended. The skillful handling of the ship by Lieutenant M.D. Jester, United States Coast Guard, made the success of the attack possible. 3. There were no casualties or damages to the ship except the temporary deafness of the left ear of Halloran James J. 233331, Seaman First Class. 4. All ordnance performed satisfactorily except for jams on one 50 caliber and one 30 caliber machine gun. Depth charges expended 11. Arbors 4. 3-inch 23 caliber common projectile bursting charge, TNT and black powder 14. 50 caliber machine gun bullets 300. 30 caliber machine gun bullets 50. Y gun propellant charges 1.5 pound black powder 2. 5. The wind was from the east, force 1. Sea was calm with slight swells from the north. Visibility 9, sky overcast. Signed, E. D. Howard. Prisoners of war taken on board USS Icarus on 9th May, 1942. Listed 33. United States Atlantic Fleet Anti-Submarine Warfare Unit, 150 Causeway Street, Boston, Massachusetts. A16-31, Serial 0224 T11/JMR, 15th of May, 1942. From the Commanding Officer to the Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Atlantic Fleet. Subject: Destruction of enemy submarine by USCG Icarus. Reference, etc. 1. Enclosure A is forwarded herewith, it being noted that a copy thereof was not furnished to the Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Atlantic Fleet. 2. From a study of reference A, certain observations have been made. These are listed as follows. A. That the submarine was waiting for a convoy, and that a convoy would have been in the vicinity a very short time after the encounter, indicates an accurate supply of intelligence information to the enemy. B. That the submarine tried to get into the wake of the Icarus substantiates the belief that German submarines are well aware of the limitations of our sound gear and perhaps our operators. C. The commanding officer's statement that had the submarine been able to man its guns, Icarus would have been sunk, may or may not be correct. A commanding officer who has sunk a submarine is apt to be regarded as an expert in this line of endeavor. His statements, therefore, may carry considerable weight. The necessity for the anti-submarine vessel to man its guns has been and continues to be stressed. For the psychological reasons outlined above, it is considered that this necessity should be emphasized to all anti-submarine vessels rather than any possible disadvantage of these guns which might exist in the event of a surface conflict. D. Very little can be obtained from reference A as to the method of attack used by Icarus. When the action report is received, further analysis may be possible. Contact was obtained on the port bow at about 1,800 yards according to one statement, and 100 yards according to another. The commanding officer stated that there were 3 minutes between the contact and explosion of the torpedo, and the executive officer said 9 minutes. Evidently, the silhouette of the Icarus-type cutter misled the submarine captain and at a distance was mistaken for another type of ship. No track of the torpedo was seen, which leads to the belief that the torpedo was electric. Apparently, Icarus had not considered the contact a submarine until the torpedo exploded. Mushy echo became firm as the bearing drew toward the beam. This would account for the bearing becoming firmer as it drew aft. It is not clear whether or not the Icarus made an attack on sound or on an area in which the torpedo exploded. It is possible that a sound contact was made after the explosion of the torpedo, since there seems no logic in making an attack on a spot where the explosion occurred. As the bearing drew aft down the port side, and the commanding officer was not called until torpedo exploded, it would appear that contact was not considered a possible submarine until the explosion, and that the Icarus was not headed at the contact. 3. From the interrogation, a clear description as to the type of submarine was not presented. ON1220-A, submarine identification, might have been helpful in this respect. From the meager description set forth, it is probable that the submarine was of the 517-ton German type. That the submarine was completely covered with barnacles, as stated, would indicate that it has been operating from an outlying base where no docking facilities are available. It may be possible that the barnacles were either painted on or were patches where the exterior paint had flaked off. Comment on interrogation of survivors will be forthcoming after return of the representative of this unit, who was sent to Charleston, South Carolina, in that connection. It is noted that the provisions of reference, B, were not carefully carried out, in that there was some fraternizing between captors and prisoners, and the captives were allowed to mingle with each other to the extent that the U-boat captain warned and instructed his crew on matters concerning security. This undoubtedly vitiated to a large extent efforts to obtain information which might otherwise have been of extreme value. 5. Return of enclosure, A, is requested. Signed, T. L. Lewis. Icarus, 15th May, 1942, Key West, Florida. From Commanding Officer, USS Icarus, to Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Fleet, via Commandant 7th Naval District. Subject, Report of Action of 9th May, 1942, on enemy submarine. Reference, A. Article 712, United States Navy Regulations. Enclosures, A. Report of Executive Officer, USS Icarus, on subject, Action 9th May, 1942, 600, confidential. B. List of prisoners of war taken in subject action. 1. USS Icarus was proceeding south of Cape Lookout on the afternoon of the 9th of May, 1942, on course 238 degrees PGC, speed 14 knots, en route from New York, New York, to Key West, Florida. The Commandant of the 6th Naval District had been advised of the passage of the USS Icarus into the 6th Naval District. Lieutenant J.G. E.D. Howard, United States Coast Guard Reserve, was officer of the deck. At 16:20, an echo was picked up 1,900 yards on the port bow. The contact was mushy, but was only 15 degrees wide. At 16:25, the commanding officer was called and came on the bridge. The sharpness of the contact improved as the contact drew abaft the beam. An explosion of a torpedo was seen and heard on the port quarter. General quarters were immediately sounded, and the commanding officer relieved the deck. The course was changed to 070 degrees PGC and headed toward the contact, which was drawing toward the west in the direction of the wake made by the Icarus previous to changing course. Propeller noises were heard. Attack number 1. Contact was lost at 180 degrees, and at a calculated interval thereafter, a pattern of 5 depth charges was laid. This consisted of a diamond with 1 charge in the center. 1 charge was dropped from the rack, followed by 2 from the Y gun, 1 from the rack, and later another from the rack. It was later learned that this attack destroyed the submarine's periscope and killed the conning officer. The course was reversed. Attack number 2. The submarine was still moving to the west. The course was changed to lead the apparent track, and at 16:45 a Y pattern was laid by dropping 1 charge from the rack followed by 2 from the Y gun. Large air bubbles were observed coming to the surface. It was later learned that the submarine attempted to surface after this attack, but the engineering officer had been killed and the machinery had been disabled. It is believed that this reference to the performance of the machinery did not apply to the propulsion machinery, as noises were heard later. It probably referred to the diving mechanism. The course was again reversed. Attack number 3. 1 charge was dropped on the spot where the bubbles were seen. Attack number 4. The course was again reversed, and at 17:08, 1 charge was dropped to the right of the bubbles. It was later learned that this attack blew the submarine to the surface, and the ascent was so rapid that members of the crew complained of pains in the head for a considerable period thereafter. At 17:09, the submarine surfaced, down by the stern. The Icarus immediately opened fire with those machine guns which were bearing, and then turned to the right to head for the submarine. The 3-inch gun and all other machine guns opened fire as they could be brought to bear. The first round from the 3-inch gun was a short, but ricocheted through the conning tower. The next round from the 3-inch gun was over, and thereafter all shots were either hits or close misses. 14 rounds of the 3-inch 23 caliber common projectile, bursting charge of TET and black powder were expended, and including the ricochet, 7 hits were observed to have been made. At 17:11, the submarine crew was observed to be abandoning ship. At 17:14, the submarine sank and firing was ceased. The submarine sank at latitude 34 degrees 12.5 north and longitude 76 degrees 35 west. The Icarus continued to circle the spot, depth of water at sea being 19 fathoms. Attack number 5. A further contact was made, propellers heard, and a large air bubble similar to that made by a submarine surfacing was observed. 1 charge was dropped on this contact, and no further sounds were heard. The Icarus continued circling, and at 17:50 stopped and picked up 33 prisoners of war, including 4 wounded, one of which had lost his left leg and died at 22:50. Another had lost his left arm. The other 2 were only slightly injured. At this time, the man had lost an arm, and another of the prisoners who was believed to be more seriously injured was placed under guard in the crew's head. Prisoners were brought aboard over the starboard gangway and were thoroughly searched. All belongings were gathered for delivery to the District Intelligence Office. All men were equipped with life jackets and escape lungs of excellent quality. All appeared to be in good physical and mental condition, although undoubtedly suffering from shock. 30 of the prisoners were placed under guard in the forward crew's compartment, and the man who lost a leg was placed in a litter and kept on deck, as it was believed better to give him as little handling as possible and to keep him in the air, which was warm. At 18:05, the course was resumed for Charleston, South Carolina, 238 degrees PGC, speed 14 knots. The crew of the submarine was reported by the commanding officer, Captain Lieutenant Helmut Rathke, to have consisted of 4 officers and 41 men. He further stated that this had been a 500-ton ship. The prisoners and the body of the dead man were delivered to the Commandant of the 6th Naval District at 11:30, 10th May, 1942, at the Charleston Navy Yard. The contacts were developed by commanding officer from the ranges and bearings given by the sound operators, not by means of a plot, but by his seaman's eye. USS Icarus is not equipped with a sound range recorder. 2. The commanding officer wishes to commend the executive officer of this unit, Lieutenant J.G. Edward Douglas Howard, United States Coast Guard Reserve, for the efficient and cool manner in which he carried out my commands in this attack. This officer is excellent material for command of patrol units, and he should be given consideration for promotion to the next higher grade in commissioned officer's rank. The other officers of this unit carried out their duties in an efficient and satisfactory manner. The engineering department functioned very satisfactorily. Warrant Machinist Henry J. Cookson is deserving of praise for the manner in which this department functioned. 3. The performance of the entire crew in action throughout the night, while all hands were kept either at stations or on guard over the prisoners, deserves the highest praise. All stations were manned promptly and without confusion. Their conduct throughout was manifested by enthusiasm, alertness, and devotion to duty. It is believed that the following deserve special commendation. Ford, Harry R., 103616, CBM. This man is a natural leader of the crew, and by his example and leadership contributed to their steadiness and effectiveness. He has been previously recommended by the commanding officer of this unit for appointment as an ensign. Mueller, Charles E., 205391. BM First Class Pro. This man is a fine, clean-cut young man. He is the gun pointer who scored 7 hits. He is very cool in any stress and is a leader. His promotion to Chief Boatswain's Mate is recommended. Quinones, Saltiago P. Jr., 224869. BM Second Class Pro. He is a very alert and has a keen mind which grasps and understands technical problems promptly and thoroughly. He operated the sound equipment during the attack. It is recommended that he be promoted to Boatswain's Mate First Class. Rabish, William L., 237067, SOM Third Class Pro. First picked up the contact. He is alert and progressing rapidly. It is recommended that he be promoted to Soundman, Second Class. Laskowski, Arthur J., 203826, SOM Third Class Pro. Assisted Quinones in the attack. He is a very good operator, and his promotion to Soundman Second Class is hereby recommended. 4. There were no casualties or damage to the ship. 5. All ordnance performed satisfactorily, with the exception of a few minor adjustments to the machine guns. 6. The wind was from the east, force 1. Sea was calm, with slight swells from the north, visibility 9, sky overcast. Signed, M. D. Jester. Copies to Commander-in-Chief U.S. Fleet Readiness Section, Commander-in-Chief U.S. Atlantic Fleet, ASW Unit, 1st Naval District, 150 Causeway Street, Boston, Massachusetts. Commandant, U.S. Coast Guard File. United States Atlantic Fleet Anti-Submarine Warfare Unit, May 16, 1942. Memorandum to Commanding Officer, ASW Unit, U.S. Atlantic Fleet. Subject: Summary of information of an engagement between Icarus and German U-boat obtained by visit to Charleston, South Carolina. Reference A. DIO 6ND Report of Interview of Officers of Icarus and Survivors of Sunken German U-Boat, and dated 11 May 1942. B. Conversation with Lieutenant Commander NER, Operations Officer 6ND, Charleston, South Carolina. C. Conversation with Captain Guy Baker, Chief of Staff for Commandant 6ND. D. Conversation with Commander Sowers, District Intelligence Officer 6ND. E. Conversation with officers of Intelligence Group from the Foreign Section of ONI at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. At 0830, 12 May 1942, reported to Operations Office 6ND at Charleston, South Carolina, I was told that the Icarus had sunk a German submarine believed to be of the 517-ton class while proceeding independently en route Key West, Florida. The attack occurred about 25 miles south of Cape Lookout in 120 feet of water. At 1625 Eastern War Time, on 9th May 1942, while cruising at 14 knots on course 235 degrees T, sound contact was made sharp on the port bow at a range estimated from 200 to 1,800 yards. At a time interval estimated from 4 to 9 minutes later, an explosion was heard, seen, and felt on the port quarter. The estimated range varied in estimation from 100 to 200 yards. At this time, the commanding officer of Icarus took over the con and made 3 attacks on the submarine. These attacks were in the locality of the explosion, the details which have not been satisfactorily reported. The Commandant 7ND has been asked to provide the services of experts at the Sound School in Key West to make a searching study with the commanding officer Icarus and report on the details of the engagement. The submarine came to the surface after 2 attacks consisting of 5 and 3 DCs, respectively. In the meantime, Icarus had proceeded to a distance approximately 1,000 yards and opened fire on the hostile craft with all her guns as soon as the conning tower broke the surface of the water. The submarine remained on the surface for about 4 minutes, during which time 33 members of the crew escaped through the conning tower hatch. These men were picked up by Icarus and taken to Charleston, South Carolina. On arrival, the officers of the Icarus were interviewed by the DIC of 6ND, followed by interrogation of each member of the submarine. The prisoners were small, healthy, loyal German subjects, well disciplined in security and noticeably military in bearing and appearance. They came aboard Icarus in order of seniority and left in the same order. The commanding officer U-boat thanked the commanding officer Icarus for the good treatment his crew received. One member of the survivors, badly injured, died en route to Charleston. Another is still in the hospital there with an arm missing. The crew of U-boat averaged 22 years of age. The commanding officer was 32 years old. Displayed high spirits and a good degree of intelligence. They were courteous to the DIC, answering any questions of a personal nature, but refusing to answer those of military value. The prisoners were turned over to the provost marshal at Parris Island, South Carolina, who immediately took them to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where they are now held in a specially prepared detention camp by the Army. A special investigating unit, especially trained in the interrogation of survivors of German submarines from the Foreign Section of ONI, met them at Fort Bragg and are now carrying on the investigation. This group consists of 2 U.S. naval officers. One of them has done this same work in England. The third member of this group is an English officer who has done most of all this kind of work for England. To date, there has been little information of military value gleaned from the questioning of the survivors. One reason is that they are security-minded, having been, it is believed, well-trained in that respect. Another reason is that while they were in the water and for a time on board Icarus, their CO was cautioning them against giving out information of any military value. Items of interest noted, but not at all established as facts, are listed below. 1. Name of commanding officer used to identify U-boat. 2. Suspect U-boat as being U-352. 3. Suspected as being 517-tonner. 4. Crew consisted of about 41 men and 4 officers. 5. U-boat left some port in France about 1st April 1942. 6. U-boat had been in the area for 4 days. There were no indications that this U-boat had sunk any vessels, although one member of the crew was heard to say that one ship had been sunk but did not give the time and place. 7. Not impossible that the torpedo explosion had something to do with the damaging of the submarine. 8. Much to be learned about the activities of U-boat prior to abandoning ship. 9. U-boat reported to be coated with barnacles. 10. Investigation by divers should reveal damage done by torpedo explosion and or damage done by the DC attacks, etc. Information of sufficient importance and reliability to warrant immediate considerations are: 1. The alertness of Icarus in opening fire on the U-boat with all her guns at the distance the conning tower of the U-boat emerged is commendable and may have a great deal to do with their success. A smothering fire from all guns raked to U-boat at close range and prevented the crew from manning any gun. 2. Survivors rescued by any vessel should be separated immediately upon coming aboard. Officers should be kept from other members of the crew, and if at all possible, the youngest and least intelligent should be separated into a third group. 3. The question of a small ship picking up a large number of survivors presents itself. The commanding officer should be able to judge for himself. At no time should he sacrifice his ship to get survivors. But second only to the U-boat itself, survivors are considered valuable booty. Aside from the humanitarian point of view, their rescue is desirable. A life raft or small boat with food may be provided for them and their recovery effected at a later date. Reports to follow that will help to make the story of U-boat Rathke complete are: 1. Report of the engagement by Icarus. 2. Report from Commandant 7ND in regard to study made by experts from the Sound School, Key West, Florida, about the movements and method of attack by Icarus during the engagement. 3. Reports from ONI. These may possibly include a preliminary report in the near future. Signed, respectively, J.T. Hardin, Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Navy. United States Atlantic Fleet Anti-Submarine Warfare Unit, AS Serial 02461/RS, May 18, 1942. From Commanding Officer Atlantic Fleet Anti-Submarine Warfare Unit to the Commander-in-Chief United States Atlantic Fleet. Subject: Summary of information of the engagement between Icarus and German U-boat obtained by visit to Charleston, South Carolina. Enclosure A. Copy of Lieutenant Commander J.T. Hardin, U.S. Navy report of visit to Charleston, South Carolina. 1. Enclosure A is forwarded herewith. 2. In the future, visits of this nature by members of this unit are not recommended unless distances involved will permit arrival at the scene within a very short time after survivors have landed. 3. Should a U-boat be captured or raised and brought into port on the Atlantic or Gulf Coast at any time in the future, it is requested that orders be immediately issued to Commander T.L. Lewis, U.S. Navy, and Lieutenant Commander J.T. Hardin, U.S. Navy, without further request, for the purposes of inspection and gaining information pertinent to anti-submarine warfare. Signed, T.L. Lewis. Preliminary report of interrogation of survivors from a German U-boat sunk by United States Coast Guard ICARUS in position 34.12.05 north by 76.35 west at 17:14 Eastern War Time on May 9th, 1942. Date of report, May 21st, 1942. Number, U-352. Size, 500 tons. Type, 7C. Commander, Captain Lieutenant Helmut Rathke. Conning tower device, coat of arms of town Flensburg. Built, Flensburg. Flotilla, probably 7th, if no USA flotilla has been organized. Base of operations, St. Nazaire. Officers, Captain Lieutenant Helmut Rathke, Oberleutnant Engineer Tietz, deceased. Lieutenant Sir C. Ernst, deceased. Lieutenant Sir C. Anwärter, Oskar Bernhardt. Feinrich Sir C. Ernst Kammerer. Crew, 4 officers and 42 men, of which 2 officers and 12 men died. List of crew and deceased members appended. Early history of U-352. Course of instruction for crew during final phases of construction during June, July, August, and September 1941. Life-saving gear stamped by markers with date 15 August 1941. Date of commissioning in October 1941. Trials with U-Boat Acceptance Commission mid-October to mid-November. During this time, U-352 was based on Kiel and made one trip to Gottenhappen, returning to Kiel and then to Flensburg, where U-352 went into dock for adjustments on or about 28th November 1941. Members of the crew had staggered periods of leave throughout December, the last to depart, returning on or about 29th December 1941 to Flensburg. One member received punishment which involved detention on board and loss of leave for getting drunk and being adrift on shore. First war cruise. It appeared probable that U-352 left Flensburg on or about 20 January 1942 and may well have called at Trondheim or some other Norwegian port for final exercises before proceeding to the Atlantic, although there is no confirmation of this apart from Norwegian money in the pockets of survivors. She arrived in St. Nazaire on approximately 5 March 1942. One prisoner stated she had sunk nothing en route, but this statement need not necessarily be correct. More leave was granted to the crew during their stay in St. Nazaire. 2 members returning to Germany to be married. At this time, the crew were accommodated in the U-boatsmen's home. Left St. Nazaire towards middle of April. Second war cruise. Were out just over 3 weeks when sunk, proceeded surfaced and submerged. frequently sighted aircraft, and once, on May 7, 1942, about 2 days before sinking, were bombed with 2 bombs dropped by an AC. 2 prisoners stated that U-352 sunk nothing at all. Crew were most reticent about movements, but denied sighting USA coast on any occasion. Radio concerts were permitted on board, and jazz music, of which they were fond, was relayed over the ship's loudspeakers from USA stations. Food was good, fresh meat, vegetables, and canned food being typical dinner. A small quantity of alcohol was permitted. Crew were allowed to take sun baths in small numbers. It appeared that on sighting Icarus, action stations was sounded, and the crew went to their posts. Rathke maneuvered into position at periscope depth and fired 1 bow torpedo. Shortly after, an explosion was heard. According to the commander, the torpedo, believed to have been electric, appears to have dived to the bottom and exploded on contact. This may have thrown up the mud seen by Icarus. Rathke's next move was to submerge until he grounded his U-boat approximately beneath the position of the torpedo explosion. In doing this, he may have hoped to avoid anti-sub detecting devices, and/or to escape the full effect of depth charges. The grounding of U-boats in shallow waters may be the required avoiding action prescribed by Admiral U-boats. Prisoners stated that the next thing heard was a hail of depth charges, some of which were extremely close. There is strong evidence to support the belief that the principal damage caused within the U-boat was the failure of the electric motors. At least part of the lighting equipment fused. Gauges and glasses were smashed in the control room, and deck was littered with broken fragments. Lockers were burst open, and crockery and other loose gear shattered and flung about the boat. The crew were bruised and shaken. A major leak was denied, and there appeared to have been no development of chlorine gas. Rathke then decided to destroy the boat and ordered all men to put on lungs and life jackets. He then blew the tanks, and as U-352 surfaced, the command was given to abandon ship. There was little doubt that scuttling charges were set and detonated, as members of the crew admit hearing 2 muffled explosions while swimming. All men suffered severely from headache when rescued, a state of affairs which they attributed to the sudden surfacing of the U-boat. 1 man was cut by the jagged edge of U-352's bridge Fairwater, which was already under fire from Icarus. The U-boat's gunner stated that they intended to man the 2-centimeter anti-aircraft gun on surfacing, but were speedily dissuaded by the accurate fire of Icarus. Details of U-352. U-352 was similar in every respect to U-570, captured by the British and renamed HMS Graf, a full description of which has already been published. No additional details of interest was brought to light during interrogation. Raid on St. Nazaire. U-352 is believed to have been present in St. Nazaire during the March 27th raid by British Commando forces, but those of the crew who were not on leave were quartered in a U-boatsman's home, some way from the docks at the time. Many of the prisoners admitted hearing or reading of the raid, but all, without exception, obstinately refused to divulge any information concerning the damage done. Interrogators were left with the impression that prisoners had been required to swear an additional oath of secrecy before leaving St. Nazaire. One prisoner stated that he would undoubtedly be stood against a wall and shot on returning to Germany should it ever be known that he had given away any information. One prisoner stated that there had been no damage in the town, but some damage in the harbor area. He stated he believed that the main lock gates were undamaged, but that the British destroyer had exploded. The majority of those few prisoners who were persuaded to say as much as a word concerning the raid repeated the German propaganda story that the raid was beaten off before any damage was done. 2 prisoners grudgingly acknowledged that the raid was a most daring attack. Other U-boats. From prisoners' statements, there is some reason to believe that another U-boat was in the area when U-352 was sunk. Serial 064 A16 3GSF 27CLCA IWB. Headquarters Gulf Sea Frontier, Key West, Florida, May 22, 1942. First endorsement on letter of Commanding Officer U.S. Coast Guard Cutter Icarus of May 15, 1942. From Commander Gulf Sea Frontier to the Commander-in-Chief U.S. Fleet. Via Commander Eastern Sea Frontier. Subject: United States Coast Guard Cutter Icarus, report of action of May 9, 1942, on enemy submarine. 1. Forwarded, concurring in the recommendations as contained in the basic report. 2. The Commander Gulf Sea Frontier recommends that the commanding officer of the USCGC Icarus, Lieutenant M.D. Jester, United States Coast Guard, be awarded appropriate recognition. 3. The Commandant, 6th Naval District, has been furnished a copy of the basic report. Signed, R.S. Crenshaw. Copy 2. Commanding Officer, United States Coast Guard Cutter Icarus, District Coast Guard Officer, Key West, Florida. United States Atlantic Fleet Anti-Submarine Warfare Unit, A16-31, Serial 02701/RS, May 25, 1942. From Commanding Officer, Atlantic Fleet Anti-Submarine Warfare Unit, to the Commander-in-Chief, United States Atlantic Fleet. Subject: Action Report, USCG Icarus, Analysis of. Reference: A. Icarus Letter of 15th May, 1942, Action Report. B. Anti-Submarine Warfare Unit Letter A16-31, Serial 0224 of 15th May, 1942. C. Anti-Submarine Warfare Unit Letter A8, Serial 0246 of 18th May, 1942. Enclosure A. Subject analysis with sketch appended. 1. Enclosure A is forwarded herewith. 2. By reference, B. This unit submitted certain observations and comments on the preliminary report of the action. 3. Reference, C. Forwarded of summary of information obtained by Lieutenant Commander J.T. Hardin, U.S. Navy, on his visit to Charleston, South Carolina, following the engagement of Icarus with enemy submarine. Signed, T.L. Lewis. United States Atlantic Fleet Anti-Submarine Warfare Unit, 25th May, 1942. Analysis of Action Report, USS Icarus, Coast Guard. Attack at 1631 LZT, 9th May, 1942. Latitude 32, 12, 5 north. Longitude 76, 35 west. Employment independent. Weather conditions: sea smooth, wind high. Sound conditions excellent. Range at which contact was obtained 1900 yards. Range at which contact was lost 180 yards. The method by which this attack was made cannot be determined from the report. contact was obtained about 15 degrees on the port bow, ranging 1,900 yards at 1620. This contact was held, but echo was rather mushy until it drew abaft the beam, when it became sharper. The commanding officer was not notified until 1625, and it appears from the report and from the tentative plot that the echo became sharper and drew to the beam at about 1626:30, or 1627. No variation in Icarus' course was made until 1629, when an explosion was seen and felt on port quarter of Icarus, distance about 500 yards. At this time, course was changed to 0700 and headed towards the contact, which was drawing toward the west. The attack was delivered at about 1631 on the eastern edge of the swirl caused by the explosion. It appears that this attack was delivered by sound tracking, as the contact was lost at 180 yards. Why the submarine ran towards the explosion area of the prematurely exploded torpedo is not known, except that it was headed in that direction on firing, and the torpedo exploded about 35 seconds later, so the possibility it was decided to use the explosion as a sound screen. The pattern was dropped on the time and the seaman's eye. From a reconstruction plot, it appears that the submarine would have to have been approximately the same course as the Icarus at speed of about 5 3/4 to 6 knots from the time of contact at 1620 until attack at 1631, and that at about 1625 or 1626 changed course towards the Icarus, firing the torpedo at 1628:30 or thereabout, aimed to hit the Icarus at 1629 to 42. This was a shot at about a 150-degree track angle. The reconstructed track of the submarine bears out the information about the mushiness of the echo, as until it drew a beam, the echoes were obtained through the wake. From information from the submarine, the attack destroyed the periscope and killed the conning officer. Apparently, the captain was not at the periscope or conning the ship. Another attack was made after the Icarus reversed course. This cannot be even approximately plotted. Apparently, this also was effective, as large air bubbles were observed. A third attack was made, dropping one charge on the air bubbles. After reversing course, another charge was dropped to the right, west of the bubbles, which forced the submarine to the surface. Apparently, contact was regained after each attack, as the report speaks of hearing noises. Apparently, this submarine was not using radical evasive tactics, as all attacks appear to have been in almost a straight line along the submarine's course. United States Atlantic Fleet, Care Postmaster, New York, New York. Commander-in-Chief of Atlantic, File A16382/01162. 28th May, 1942. From Commander-in-Chief United States Atlantic Fleet to Commander Eastern Sea Frontier. Subject, USCG Icarus Action Report. Enclosure, A. Copy of Atlantic Fleet Anti-Submarine Warfare Unit Serial 0246 of May 18, 1942, with enclosure thereto. B. Copy of Atlantic Fleet Anti-Submarine Warfare Unit Serial 0224 of May 15, 1942. C. Copy of Atlantic Fleet Anti-Submarine Warfare Unit Serial 0270 of May 25, 1942, with enclosure thereto. 1. Enclosures A to C, inclusive, are forwarded herewith for information as the Icarus was operating under your command at the time. Signed, O. M. Hustvedt, Chief of Staff. Copy 2, Commander-in-Chief, with enclosures, Atlantic Fleet Anti-Submarine Warfare Unit. Navy Department, Office of the Chief of Naval Operations, Washington. Final report of interrogation of survivors from U-352, sunk by USCG Icarus on May 9, 1942, in approximate position, latitude 34.12.05 north, longitude 76.35 west. Table of Contents. Chapter 1, Introductory Remarks. Chapter 2, Crew of U-352. 3, Early History of U-352. 4, First War Cruise. 5, Second and Last War Cruise. 6, Sinking of U-352. 7, Details of U-352. 8, Other U-boats. 9, U-boat construction. 10, U-boat tactics. 11, General remarks on U-352. 12, Commando raid on St. Nazaire, March 27, 1942. 13, Sailors' gathering places in ports. 14, Hitler and the Navy. 15, Miscellaneous remarks. Annexes. A. Log of punishments imposed on his men by Rathke during their temporary internment. B. List of crew of U-352. Chapter 1, Introductory Remarks. 33 survivors of U-352 were taken aboard the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Icarus, which sank the U-boat off Cape Lookout at 1714 EWT on May 9, 1942, in approximate position, latitude 34.1205 north and longitude 76.35 west. The crew was a particularly difficult problem to interrogators. Because of unavoidable circumstances, the formal interrogation did not occur until 3 months after the sinking. Meantime, the security-minded prisoners were subjected to almost constant coaching by their commander, Captain Lieutenant Helmut Rathke. Even while in the water awaiting rescue, Rathke shouted to his men warnings about the necessity of refusing to divulge information. Unfortunately, aboard the Icarus, he was twice able to lecture his men. A brief preliminary interrogation was made shortly after the men were landed in the United States. Thereafter they were taken to a place of temporary internment, where Rathke was permitted to maintain direct control over his men. A stern disciplinarian, Rathke kept a strict surveillance over his men during this temporary internment. Ample evidence of this can be found in the list of punishments meted out to his men for various delinquencies. See Annex A. U-352 was the first U-boat sunk in American waters in the present war from which survivors were taken. The following are the equivalents of German commissioned ranks which appear in this report. Kapitän zur See, Captain. Fregattkapitän, Commander. Korvettkapitän, Lieutenant Commander. Kapitänleutnant, Lieutenant. Oberleutnant zur See, Lieutenant, junior grade. Oberleutnant Engineer, Lieutenant, junior grade, engineering, duties only. Leutnant zur See, Ensign. Chapter 2, Crew of U-352. The complement of U-352 consisted of 3 officers, 1 midshipman, 18 petty officers, and 24 men, bringing the total complement to 46. The engineer officer, executive officer, and 11 of the crew perished in the sinking. Another enlisted man died later aboard the Icarus. The entire group of survivors processed an unusually high degree of security consciousness. In view of the extreme youth of the crew, 13 members of which were less than 21 years old, such zeal may be attributed largely to the captain's influence upon his men, and to his exploitation of this influence both prior to the rescue and on subsequent occasions, when he was given ample opportunity to harangue them into urgency of withholding all information from their interrogators. The captain, Kapitänleutnant Helmut Rathke, is 32 years old and of the naval class of 1930. He came on active duty in 1935 and has served in various types of surface vessels. He has twice been around the world in the line of duty since 1936. Born in East Prussia, he is now a resident of Flensburg, where he has left his wife and small daughter. Though courteous to a fault and cultivated, Rathke has been conspicuously arrogant in complaining of his treatment as a prisoner, and in assuming unwarranted control of his men following their internment. He professes unqualified admiration for Hitler and National Socialism, whereas his brief record as a U-boat commander is bereft of successes. He was held in great respect by his men, on whom he apparently inflicted a martinet's discipline. He admits relationship with Oberleutnant Franz Gramitzky, who commanded U-138, sunk near Gibraltar in June 1941, and who is a British prisoner of war, but denies that they are brothers-in-law. Rathke stated that he has two brothers who are officers in the German army and who now are fighting on the Russian front. He holds the Iron Cross second class. Rathke injured a knee in a skiing accident some time before taking over U-352. He is believed to have been laid up for about 6 months. One prisoner stated that the injury still gives Rathke trouble. It seems Rathke had to use a wheelchair at the yards during the final stages of U-352's construction. Virtually nothing is known of the two officers who were lost with the boat. The engineer officer, Oberleutnant Engineer Heinz Tietz, was of the 1937 naval class. He was married at Kiel in December 1941. The executive officer, Leutnant Sersi Josef Ernst, was of the naval class of 1938. Lieutenant Sersi Sonderführer Oskar Bernhard, age 25, served in U-352 as navigator. Pending his commissioning as an officer, his actual rank is that of Steuermann, DR, Quartermaster, First Class, Naval Reserve. He is a native of Nuremberg and makes his home in Hamburg, Altona, where he was taught navigation at the nautical school. He joined the Navy in 1940 after serving in the Engineer Corps of the German Army and participating in the Polish campaign. A Catholic, he does not hold uncompromisingly to National Socialist views, but is a loyal, conscientious German and extremely security-minded. He has received the Minesweeper Badge, the U-Boat Badge, and the Iron Cross Second Class. The midshipman, Ernst Kammerer, son of a Berlin engineer, is a characteristically truculent product of the Hitler Youth movement. He was born in Canton, China, and has been in the Navy since 1940. After serving in a destroyer, he volunteered for the U-boat arm. Chapter 3, Early History of U-352. The crew of U-352 was called to Flensburg in the summer of 1941 to observe the final phase of construction, Babellehrung. One prisoner stated that he arrived for this course of instruction in May or June, while another said he arrived in July. The men lived aboard the submarine itself. Prisoners admitted that their boat was commissioned in mid-October 1941, but they refused to a man to reveal when she was laid down and when she was launched. If construction followed a normal schedule, however, it would be fair to assume that U-352 was laid down in the summer of 1940. That is, about a year before she was commissioned, and was launched early in July 1941, 3 or 4½ months before her commissioning in the middle of October. The crew's life-saving gear bore the date August 15, 1941, apparently stamped in by the manufacturer. In mid-October, U-352 proceeded to Kiel, where the U-Boat Acceptance Commission, the UAK, U-Bootsabnahmekommission, took her in charge for 5 weeks of tests in the Baltic Sea. Prisoners stated that they put into Gottenhafen several times for a night, including October 31st. They also spent a few days in Danzig, where coxswain Nietzsche, according to his own statement, joined the boat. Returning to Kiel, U-352 made at least one more sortie for tactical exercises. U-352 then returned to dock in Flensburg for minor repairs and adjustments, arriving, one prisoner stated, on November 27th or 28th, 1941. While these adjustments were being made, the men were granted leave on a stagger basis throughout December. Each man apparently received 14 to 16 days. The last to depart on leave seemed to have returned to Flensburg on about December 29th, 1941. One man felt the sting of Rathke's strict discipline. He was punished by detention on board and loss of leave for getting drunk and being adrift on shore. After the final overhaul in the Flensburg docks, U-352 again proceeded to Kiel, probably around mid-January, for a couple of days. One prisoner said, to take on torpedoes and provisions. U-352 now was ready for her first war cruise. Chapter 4, First War Cruise. U-352 was at sea approximately 5 weeks on her first war cruise, according to prisoners' statements, sinking nothing at all. It appears probable that U-352 left Kiel the latter part of January, heading north through the Kattegat and the Skagerrak. One prisoner stated that none of the U-Boat Acceptance Commission experts was aboard, as is sometimes the case when a new U-boat sails for Norway the first time. Thus, U-352 appears to have been pronounced fit and ready for duty. Clearing the Skagerrak, U-352 turned north to put into Bergen for one night. No one was permitted to leave the boat. One prisoner, a machinist's mate, stated they did not pass through any English minefields. As far as can be learned, U-352 cruised her operational area at least 3 weeks before her first action with surface craft occurred. Sighting a steamer, Rathke prepared to attack. Before he could get his torpedoes off, prisoners stated 4 corvettes appeared, forcing U-352 to submerge and abandon the attack. Depth charges apparently gave her several exciting minutes. There were some very respectable explosions. Es hat ganz anständig geknallt, according to a prisoner, but no damage was inflicted. Several prisoners admitted they were frequently, although unsuccessfully, attacked by aircraft off Iceland. Finally, U-352 turned southeast for St. Nazaire. According to one man en route, they sighted a destroyer, at which they fired a fan of 4 torpedoes. All missed. The destroyer, apparently unaware of the attack, did not counterattack, and U-352 continued on her way. U-352 arrived in St. Nazaire the first week of March. The men spent a day cleaning ship, then transferred to the U-boat home, Uheim, their quarters ashore. 3 Iron Crosses were awarded to crew members after the first cruise, according to one prisoner. At least part of the crew, probably most of them, were given leave. 2 men returned to Germany to be married. A machinist's mate stated he was married March 10. He enjoyed a brief honeymoon before returning to St. Nazaire on March 19, 1942. Coxswain Neitsch said he remained in St. Nazaire without leave to oversee the boat's overhaul. He checked the boat for needed repairs and adjustments, then saw to the oiling, cleaning, and so on. Frequent air raids and the commando raid of March 27 on St. Nazaire occurred while U-352 was in port. Chapter 5. Second and Last War Cruise. U-352 is believed to have left St. Nazaire on her final war cruise about the end of the first week in April 1941. There was no band to play her away. She carried 14 torpedoes and no mines, one prisoner said. A machinist's mate stated that he thought they departed through the Little Lock. This presumably means the south entrance to the harbor, inasmuch as the lock on the east and the Normandy lock were damaged in the British commando raid of March 27, 1941. The trip to America seems to have required about 3 weeks. The boat cruised at slow speed, langsame Fahrt, presumably to conserve fuel. The men had sun baths on deck, 3 or 4 at a time, for short periods. U-352 seems to have arrived in American waters about May 2nd, a week before her destruction. Misfortune plagued her. As far as can be learned from the crew, she sank nothing. When on the surface, lookouts had to be put on the alert constantly for aircraft. They crash-dived several times to elude patrol planes. One such occasion seems to have caused a genuine fright. Probably during the forenoon on May 2nd or 3rd, one of the lookouts sighted a twin-engined aircraft about 4 miles away, flying between 600 and 700 feet. The alarm was given, and the boat crash-dived. Crew members later said that they thought that this airplane had spotted them, and they expected to be attacked. They said they heard no bombs, however. About 2 days before their sinking, an airplane spotted them, this time dropping 2 bombs, prisoner said. The boat escaped without damage. None of the crew would admit upon questioning that he saw the United States coast at any time. They were allowed, however, to tune in on American radio programs in the boat. They liked jazz, Weltanschauung notwithstanding. It appears probable that they made a few unsuccessful attacks. Several men admitted that ships were sighted. A coxswain said a total of 7 or 8 torpedoes were fired on different occasions, but that the captain never claimed to have sunk anything. This coxswain said they made several attacks one day, one of them on what he presumed to be a refrigerator ship. He said it had a mare-type bow. The next attack U-352 made, that on the USCG ICARUS, was to be her last. Chapter 6. Sinking of U-352. The Icarus, cruising at 14 knots, about 30 miles south of Cape Lookout, contacted U-352 with sound equipment at 1625 Eastern War Time, May 9, 1942. Icarus was on a compass course of 235 degrees at position 34 degrees, 12 by 5 north, 76 degrees, 35 west. The sea was calm. There was a slight swell. Visibility was about 9 miles. The action which resulted in the sinking of U-352 occurred substantially as follows. Icarus's sound equipment indicated an initial contact that a possible submarine was an estimated 100 yards ahead. Nothing was in sight. 4 minutes later, a torpedo was seen to explode approximately 200 yards off port quarter. The captain of the Icarus immediately reversed course. Reaching the eastern edge of the swirl caused by the torpedo explosion, He laid a diamond pattern of 5 depth charges. He then circled the spot and dropped 3 more depth charges in a V pattern. Large air bubbles were observed on the surface. Icarus dropped another depth charge. A minute later, at 17:09 Eastern War Time, the U-boat broke the surface at a 45-degree angle down by the stern. Icarus immediately opened fire with her 50 caliber machine gun on her starboard quarter and 30 caliber machine gun on the flying bridge. By that time, she had moved to approximately 1,000 yards distant. Men were seen climbing from the U-boat's conning tower. Icarus swung around as quickly as possible to bring her 3-inch gun to bear. Her first 2 shells straddled the U-boat, then the gunner found target. Of 14 shots, 6 direct hits and 1 ricochet hit were scored on the hull and conning tower. 33 men tumbled from the conning tower in clock-like precision, swimming rapidly away from the boat. U-352 remained on the surface 5 minutes. She sank at 17:14, and Icarus, now 300 yards away, ceased firing. Icarus circled the spot. At about 300 yards from the survivors, she picked up another contact. She proceeded to the indicated area and dropped another depth charge at 17:34. A large amount of oil came to the surface, described as a light diesel oil, practically colorless, with a strong odor like kerosene. The commanding officer of Icarus dispatched a message requesting instructions how to proceed from this point. Upon receipt of orders, he picked up 33 survivors at 17:50 and proceeded to Charleston, South Carolina. Meanwhile, what was happening inside the U-boat? The full account remains concealed behind the crew's reticence. The following story, however, can be pieced together from available information. One prisoner stated that U-352 had been in the area of her final battle for about 4 days. When U-352 sighted Icarus, she was dead ahead. Action stations were sounded. Rathke maneuvered into position at periscope depth and fired 1 bow torpedo, believed to have been electric. There is reason to believe that Rathke mistook Icarus for a larger craft. The U-boat heard an explosion. Some, at least, thought momentarily that they had scored a hit. If Rathke thought so, he could not have been long deceived. In reality, the torpedo breached, sank, and exploded, churning mud to the surface. Rathke believed he was operating in water 95 feet deep. Actually, it was nearer to 120 feet. Apparently hoping to avoid Icarus's anti-submarine devices, he took his boat to the approximate position of the torpedo explosion and there grounded her. Ironically, this was precisely the spot Icarus chose for her first depth charge attack. Prisoners stated that they heard a hail of depth charges, some of them extremely close. The first explosions destroyed the periscope and killed an officer in the conning tower. Gauges and glasses were smashed in the control room. The deck was littered with broken gear. Lockers burst open. Crockery and other loose objects were flung about the boat. The crew was shaken up. All lights except the emergency system failed. There is evidence that the electric motors failed, perhaps the greatest injury the boat suffered. There apparently was no water or chlorine gas in the boat. Rathke seems to have concluded that his craft was damaged beyond hope of saving. He stated later he believed about 60 depth charges had been dropped. Rathke ordered his men to put on lungs and life jackets. He blew the tanks and gave the command to abandon ship. The quartermaster, who was in the diesel room at the time, ran to the control room, then returned, shouting, "All men out!" The petty officer in charge of the diesels, according to one prisoner, remonstrated, "You crazy dogs, we can run on our diesels." The U-boat's gunner stated that they intended to man the 2-centimeter anti-aircraft gun on the surfacing, but were dissuaded by fire from Icarus. Rathke, when asked why he did not try to use his deck gun, said that the angle of the boat was too great, and that Icarus was firing at his men. 13 of the crew went down with U-352. While the U-boat's survivors were swimming about awaiting rescue, the security-conscious Rathke shouted warnings to his men not to give any information to their rescuers. 4 members of his crew had been wounded. While still in the water, Rathke attempted to apply a tourniquet on machinist's mate Russell, whose leg had been severed. Russell died that night aboard the Icarus. Rathke called from the water, asking Icarus to take his wounded aboard first. All of the rescued men reported headaches, which they attributed to the sudden surfacing of the U-boat. Men on the Icarus said that the discipline of the U-boat crew throughout the rescue operations was exemplary. Chapter 7. Details of U-352. U-352 was similar to U-370, captured by the British and subsequently commissioned as HMS Graf, a full description of which has been published by the Admiralty. She was 500 tons, type 7C. She was equipped with an 8.8 centimeter cannon forward of the conning tower and a 2 centimeter anti-aircraft gun on the bridge. She carried 14 torpedoes on her last cruise. It is safe to assume that 12 of these were electric and that the other 2 were air torpedoes, stowed in the upper deck containers. Her color was dark. She was not camouflaged. The flotilla to which she belonged could not be learned with any certainty. Several prisoners indicated that U-352 was attached to the 3rd U-boat flotilla based on La Pallice, although it is certain that she never put into any French port other than Saint-Nazaire, where the 7th flotilla is based. Prisoners said that La Pallice was too crowded. U-352 was adopted by the city of Flensburg, the city where she was built, and Rathke's hometown. She displayed the Flensburg coat of arms on her conning tower. No prisoner would admit the existence of a device similar to our radar, and it may be that U-352 had none. It is known, however, from prisoners captured more recently, that such a device was carried on their boat U-94, which was sunk. In port, the crew was divided into 3 watches. 2 were allowed to go ashore, while 1 remained aboard. Chapter 8. Other U-boats. U-751. A detailed account of a cruise off the United States by Captain Lieutenant Bigalk, believed to command U-751, was published in the Pariser Zeitung of May 27, 1942. The account, written by Propaganda Ministry reporter Herbert Strang, who made the cruise, said Bigalk remained in port only a few days after sinking the aircraft carrier HMS Audacity, before embarking for North America. This cruise would appear to have taken place in January 1942. The account reveals that ships were silhouetted by the glow of lights along the United States coast. Bigalk sank 1 ship en route to the United States. He sank a second, a 5,000 T tanker, with 2 torpedoes near an American lighthouse. Later, Bigalk sent his last torpedo into an 8,000 T freighter. The report stated that they were so near the coast that they did not dare to surface and use their deck guns. U-205. The German High Command communique of June 17, 1942, credited Captain Lieutenant Retschke's U-boat, believed to be U-205, with sinking a British cruiser in the attack between June 13th and 15th on convoys in the Mediterranean. U-559. The OKW communique of June 12, 1942, stated that Captain Lieutenant Heitmann's U-boat, believed to be U-559, especially distinguished itself off the Palestine coast in the Mediterranean in an attack on the convoy destined for Tobruk. U-96 and U-552. Two prisoners from U-352 admitted that Corvette Captain Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock, believed to command U-96, and Captain Lieutenant Erich Topp, believed to command U-552, were in St. Nazaire while U-352 was there in March or early April 1942. U-332. SS Raphael Semmes, a U.S. cargo ship, was torpedoed without warning at 0833 GCT on June 28, 1942 at 29 degrees 30 north, 64 degrees 30 west. 10 of the survivors were taken aboard the U-boat, given medical attention and supplies, and then released. The U-boat commander introduced himself as Lieutenant Liebe. Heidelberg was painted on the forepart of the conning tower with a coat of arms with a lion insignia just below. A Cupid mermaid was painted forward on the starboard side. The U-boat was painted dark gray and appeared to be undamaged. Liebe was described as 5'7" tall, weight 155, blue eyes, blonde and heavily bearded. British sources indicates that Captain Lieutenant Johannes Liebe probably commands U-332. It should be noted that the choice of a Cupid as device by Liebe, love, is a typical example of devices selected for their relation to the captain's name. U-38, Corvette Captain Heinrich Liebe's former boat, bore as a device a Cupid astride a torpedo. U-boat commanders. Following is a list of U-boat commanders cited in German High Command communiques between May 22nd and July 7th, 1942, as having particularly distinguished themselves in attacks on shipping in American waters, together with the numbers of their U-boats which they are believed to command. Captain Lieutenant Thurman, U-553, HCC 52242, Oberleutnant Folkers, U-125, HCC 52242, Captain Lieutenant Moore, U-124, HCC 61842, Captain Lieutenant Hartenstein, U-1000, HCC 6642, Captain Lieutenant von Rochensteil, U-502, HCC 61842, Oberleutnant Ites, U-94, HCC 61842, Corvette Captain Schacht, HCC 51842, Captain Lieutenant Verderman, HCC 52242, Captain Lieutenant Vite, HCC 61842, Captain Lieutenant Rostin, HCC 62542. Knight's insignia to the Iron Cross. The Deutsche Zeitung in Norwegen of Oslo on April 11th, 1942, published a picture of Captain Lieutenant Topp on the occasion of his receiving the oak leaves, Eichenlaub, to his knight's insignia, Ritterkreuz, of the Iron Cross. He was stated to be the 87th German to win this decoration. The German communique of April 11, 1942, claimed for Topp a total of 31 ships sunk with a tonnage of 208,000 tons, including one destroyer and one escort vessel, Bewaker, Top is believed to command U-352. Award of the Knight's insignia to the Iron Cross to Kapitänleutnant Johann Mohr was announced in a communique dated March 28, 1942, in the Neues Wiener Tagblatt of March 29, 1942. This apparently confirms that Johann, not Eberhard, is the Mohr believed to be commanding U-124. Kapitänleutnant Bigalk received the Knight's Cross to the Iron Cross for sinking the aircraft carrier HMS Audacity, according to the Propaganda Ministry reporter Herbert Strang, writing in the Pariser Zeitung, March 27, 1942. Strang made at least one cruise with Bigalk. The Berlin Radio of August 24, 1942, stated that Hitler had awarded the Knight's Cross to Kapitänleutnant Karl Thurman, believed to command U-353, whose U-boat was credited with sinking 18 ships totaling 106,000 tons thus far in the war, while damaging 20 vessels. Devices. The newspaper Paris Soir of March 26, 1942, published a photograph of a U-boat with an escort vessel, apparently a trawler. The device on the U-boat's high conning tower appeared to be a question mark. Chapter 9. U-boat construction. One prisoner stated that 3 or 4 boats were building in Flensburg. At least one was fitting out, and at least one had been completed previously. He said only German workers were employed at the yards. There was no confirmation from other prisoners for these statements. Chapter 10. U-boat tactics. Rathke made the statement that he did not like operating in water as shallow as that off the United States coast. Speaking of the action in which he was sunk, he said, 30 meters of water, what could I do? On the other hand, one of the petty officers said he preferred shallow water on the theory that it increased the chance of survival in case the U-boat was sunk. Chapter 11. General Remarks on U-352. U-352's crew seemed to be content with the food on board. A standard dinner would comprise meat, potatoes, canned vegetables, and fruit. The cook stated he baked and prepared roasts aboard. 2 prisoners said the boat carried a supply of gin, schnapps. Chapter 12. Commando Raid on St. Nazaire. There is little doubt that U-352 was in St. Nazaire between her first and second war cruises when British commandos raided that port March 27, 1942. She appears not to have been damaged. Those of the crew who were not on leave were living at the U-Heim, some distance from the docks. Many of the crew admitted reading about or hearing of the raid, but all were cautious not to divulge specific information about damage done. They seemed eager to belittle the attack, daring perhaps, but a failure. One prisoner told interrogators that he undoubtedly would be stood against a wall and shot on returning to Germany should it become known that he had given any information on the raid. Another stated, however, that the crew had sworn no special oath of silence regarding the St. Nazaire attack. One prisoner said he thought U-352 passed through the Little Lock, presumably the south entrance, which was undamaged in the raid, when departing on her second war cruise early in April. Another admitted that a destroyer had been exploded in the harbor, but added little damage had been done. Only one prisoner would admit that lock gates had been damaged, but he said they were repaired in a day or 2. Following are some of the statements of prisoners concerning the raid. Fires were put out the following morning, little damage. Zwecklos, pointless. No damage in the city, little in the harbor. raid was quickly repulsed. A destroyer exploded, but did not block either lock. If the docks were really smashed, they could not be used as a base, for tides would be so great as to render them useless. However, I believe the base is being used to capacity. One prisoner stated he was in a hospital in St. Nazaire during the raid. He said he was told a day or two after the attack that there still were British at large in the town. Some of the men seemed to believe that the commandos had intended to capture the port. Chapter 13. Sailors' Gathering Places in Ports. Enlisted men generally avoid cafes and restaurants frequented by officers in order to obviate, among other things, the necessity of saluting. There are, however, apparently no restrictions against them at such places. Following are some of the haunts and gathering places mentioned by prisoners. Lorient, the XIII, presumed to be a bar named Le Triomphe. St. Nazaire, Astoria Bar. Gottenhafen, a dive named Libelle, also the Berliner Café. La Boule, Die Giftbude, the poison shop. Maritza Bar, prisoners complain that champagne costs 6 marks here. Brest, Cecilia Bar. Kiel, Metropole, Monopole, Sanssouci, and Bellevue. Flensburg, Café Delphs, frequented by midshipmen. Sans-Souci, forbidden to midshipmen. Boccaccio, where an orchestra named Weiland plays. Stadt Café, Café Hassel, Café Meyer. Deutscher Bahnhof Hotel. Hans Deutscher Arbeit, a café near the Marineschule, where a singer named Lauria Brandes performs. Stralsund, Trocadero, Rathskeller. Chapter 14. Hitler and the Navy. Rathke spoke of Hitler as a genius who has unified all the German peoples of Europe. He says Hitler likes the Navy and makes frequent trips in cruisers to the Norwegian fjords. On such cruises, Hitler dines in the wardroom. He listens attentively to the conversation and may call upon someone at the other end of the table to verify a statement which he has heard. Rathke said, Hitler has an amazing knowledge of detail, not only of things naval, but in all fields. Rathke said Hitler was not only a military genius, but a genius in everything. Chapter 15. Miscellaneous Remarks. Rathke made the remarkably frank admission that he participated in an attempt to invade England about 2 years ago. As the effort was overwhelmingly repulsed, Rathke said he now believes that England cannot be invaded, and correspondingly the Allied nations will be unable to establish a Western Front in Europe. Rathke said he disliked the Japanese, but said Germany had to accept them as allies against Russia. Rathke apparently believes that Russians commit atrocities on their prisoners, such as castration, but typically refuses to believe that Germans inflicted outrages upon Poland and Poles. Rathke expressed the conviction that Germany would conquer Russia in the autumn of 1942. A petty officer stated that the U-boat shelters in St. Nazaire were large structures subdivided into compartments equipped to house 2 U-boats each. The German government is encouraging marriages between its occupation troops in Norway and Norwegian girls, according to one prisoner, by paying dowries to such matches. According to the Berliner Börsen-Zeitung of March 31, 1942, Captain XIII Max Valentina, commanding officer of a U cruiser in 1938, now is a member of the U-Boat Acceptance Commission. He possessed the life-saving decoration, Rettungsmedaille, said to be very rare. The Munke Neueste Nachrichten on March 30th, 1942, mentioned the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Schiffswerft in Danzig. The head of the concern was said to be Generaldirektor Noe. Annex A. Log of punishments imposed on his men by Rathke during their temporary internment. Columnated. Rank, name, punishment, why punishment was given, by whom, dates. Apprentice seaman Edmund Sterung, confined to quarters 7 days on May 19th, failed to carry out command of NCO to police lavatory and assumed threatening attitude toward him. By commanding officer on May 20th to 27th. Apprentice seaman Edmund Sterung, confined to quarters 3 weeks, failed to respond to my command given by me on June 9th in course of setting up exercises. By commanding officer on June 9th, on June 10th through 24th, July 1st through 4th. Seaman Second Class Erhard Pickel, confined to quarters 3 days. On June 23rd, while on duty as cook, permitted bread leavings to be thrown into drain. By commanding officer on June 23rd, for June 24th to 27th. Seaman Second Class Erhard Pickel, confined to quarters 3 weeks. Additional punishment, infantry drill 14 days. For reviling commanding officer. On July 7th, conversed with his guard. By commanding officer on June 23rd, commanding officer on July 7th. For July 1st through 22nd, July 8th through 22nd. Fireman, 3rd Class, Heinrich Twerdy. Additional punishment 14 days infantry drill to 5 weeks guard duty of these confined to quarters. On July 7th, despite express command of commanding officer, conversed with man confined to quarters. By commanding officer, July 7th. July 8th through 22nd, July 7th through 10th. Seaman Second Class Rudolf Theil, confined to quarters 5 weeks. Same. By commanding officer on July 7th through 10th. Seaman Second Class Hans Heinz, confined to quarters 5 days as additional punishment, 14 days infantry drill. On July 10th, listened to a distant conversation at officers' table and repeated it in slanderous manner. By commanding officer on July 10th, from July 22nd to 27th, July 11th through 25th. Apprentice seaman Edmund Sterun, infantry drill 3 weeks. On July 24th, absent from ordered sport and subsequently gave false reason therefor to superior officer. By commanding officer on July 24th, July 20th to August 16th. Seaman Second Class Gerhard Hering, confined to quarters 3 weeks. On July 31st, failed to observe proper respect to superior officer and subsequently refused to obey an express order. By commanding officer on July 31st, from August 1st to 21st. Annex B. List of crew of U-352. Survivors. Name, rank, U.S. Navy equivalent. Rathke, Helmut, Kapitänleutnant, Lieutenant. Bernard, Oscar, Leutnant XIII, Sonderführer, Ensign. Kammerer, Ernst, Fähnrich XIII, Midshipman. Granke, Walter, Obermaschinist, machinist. Bollmann Heinrich, Obermaschinist, machinist. Richter Helmut H., Bootsmat, coxswain. Dane Arthur, Bootsmat, coxswain. Nietzsche Hans, Bootsmat, coxswain. Vesoli Lothar, Maschinenmat, fireman first class. Schwarzenberger Heinz, Maschinenmat, fireman first class. Brand August Michael, Maschinenmat, fireman first class. Vetsch Martin William, Maschinenmat, fireman first class. Tonnesson Kurt H., Maschinenmat, fireman first class. Russell Gerd, Maschinenmat, fireman first class. Sorg Ludwig, Funkmat, radioman third class. Kruger Kurt, Funkmat, radioman third class. Stengel Otto, Maschinenobergefreiter, fireman second class. Ruch Gerhard, Maschinenobergefreiter, fireman second class. Komanek Franz, Matrosengefreiter, seaman second class. Pickel Erhard, Matrosengefreiter, seaman second class. Herrschaft Edgar, Matrosengefreiter, seaman second class. Henschke Otto, Matrosengefreiter, seaman second class. Herring Gerhard, Matrosengefreiter, seaman second class. Heinze Hans, Matrosengefreiter, seaman second class. Twerdy Heinrich, Maschinengefreiter, fireman third class. Minsker Johann, Maschinengefreiter, fireman third class. Richter Heinz Karl, Maschinengefreiter, fireman third class. Mattis Hans, Funkgefreiter, seaman second class. Richter Gerhard, Funkgefreiter, seaman second class. Thiel Rudolf, Mechanikgefreiter, seaman second class. Link Wilhelm, Matros, apprentice seaman. Staron Edmund, Matros, apprentice seaman. Total officers 1, midshipmen 1, petty officers 15, other ranks 16, total 33. Casualties: Ernst Josef, Leutnant Zersi, ensign. Tietz Heinz, Oberleutnant, engineer, lieutenant junior grade engineering duties only. Padnik, Oberstürman, quartermaster of warrant rank. Kuckler, Mechanikamat, torpedo men's mate third class. Kirchke, Maschinenmat, fireman first class. Nicolait, Maschinenobergefreiter, fireman first class. Heinrich, Matrosengefreiter, seaman second class. Boruta, Matrosengefreiter, seaman second class. Schulze, Mechanikgefreiter, seaman second class. Martin, Matros, apprentice seaman. Kupich, Matros, apprentice seaman. Sailor, Matros, apprentice seaman. Kleinholz, Matros, apprentice seaman. Total: officers 2, petty officers 3, other ranks 8, total 13. Total crew: officers 3, midshipmen 1, petty officers 18, other ranks 24, total 46. Note: survivor Gerd Russell died on May 9, 1942, subsequent to his rescue earlier that day. Buried with full military honors in Post Section, Grave Number 18, National Cemetery, Beaufort, South Carolina.